Ms. Dundal, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. I would like to know, Ms. Dundal is a project manager at the Danish Institute for Human Rights, and I would like to know why you think that this conference on implementation is so timely at this point in time.
We think at the Institute it's very important that to collect and to discuss and to review jointly the experiences and the practices that there has been, both concerning the treaty bodies, special procedures, but also the UPR. And particularly in reference to the evaluation coming up of the Human Rights Council, it's important to have these discussions and hopefully feed in with good recommendations to improve the process.
Okay. And is this in the direction of the report that you introduced to us yesterday, which we'll put on our website, published by the Danish Institute for Human Rights? Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yes. We have over a number of years worked with governments to help them implement recommendations or observations, concluding observations and recommendations from treaty bodies. And when the UPR came into being, we thought that we would draw on these experiences and develop a methodology that could be used for the UPR for governments. But we also realized that there are, of course, also involvement of other agencies. So that's why we described what the roles and what the positions would be for governments in the UPR process, but separately also for the civil society and national human rights institutions. And that has been quite exciting. And the new publication is a description of these separate roles of these three.
So I repeat, we'll post it on our website with your permission.
Yes, sure.
So we're beginning the second and last day of our conference. It should be, I think, very interesting. What do you hope will come out of today's talks?
I hope that we will finalize by having some directions. That the participants will come up with ideas for how we can improve.
Yes.
That's why I think also it's in the program.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Dundal.
Thank you.
So I'm now with Professor Franti. He's a member of the Human Rights Committee, and I'm really interested to know his opinion on what is exactly the workable option to avoid the contradiction between treaty body system and the process.
Well, the main thing is to avoid contradictory recommendations, or for states to reject recommendations and thereby to contradict a finding of the treaty bodies. I think this would set up competing systems. It's dangerous. So we need to look for solutions. One solution is to raise the level of awareness to the treaty body findings at the national level. Sometimes we found that a state has contradicted a recommendation in UPR, but that didn't necessarily represent the view of the government back at the capital, or there was a lack of awareness that they were actually contradicting a treaty-related obligation. So raising awareness, raising understanding within government at the national level, raising the profile of treaty body recommendations so that they're very publicly considered to be an important thing back home, that will also diminish the possibility. Beyond that, there are some technical options. One is that recommendations would not repeat issues dealt with by treaty bodies, and that the only type of acceptable recommendation would be one which builds on such a where they deal with the same point, that builds on the treaty body recommendation with a view to implementation. That could be a control device put in as a procedure. I think it's difficult to envisage it, difficult to see it applied. So for me, it's about knowledge, awareness, education, raising the profile of treaty body findings before we ever even get to UPR.
So just one more question. You have mentioned in your communication that the compilation is not helpful for UPR process.
No.
Okay, so maybe we suggest...
No, I find the compilation very helpful. I think
Recommendation not helpful, but contribution is useful.
Okay, no, what I
Sorry.
meant by that, sure, that's a summary. It's not necessarily an accurate one. No, what I said was that recommendations are usually at a very high level of generality,
Yeah.
and the treaty bodies work at a very deep degree of detail and specificity. And so recommendations don't necessarily help us beyond pointing to an area that we should look at. The compilation, on the other hand, points towards very voluminous sources, other treaty bodies, special rapporteurs, civil society, national institutions, and that can be extremely useful to give us a quick access to some very detailed information around the topics we want to explore.
Thank you.
Tell us what you talked about yesterday on your panel. Not tell us because we know, but tell our viewers. And also what you take out of this two-day conference.
Oh yes, thanks very much. What I talked about mainly was that there are many challenges in making the system work. When you think about, one of my concerns that I raised yesterday and today was that there's too much of a focus on universal periodic review. It's very important for us to maintain the independence and individuality of the special procedures, treaty bodies, and OHCHR's mandate itself. Because unless we do that, we are going to get caught up in what is essentially a political process, and the gap between what the UPR does and what happens on the ground is enormous. And what I also talked about was that there are many obstacles to the realization of human rights, and unless there is a fundamental rethinking of economic policies, of security policies, of political priorities at the national level, all of this is not going to lead us anywhere. And that is why it's really critical that difficult questions are asked in the reform process, both in Geneva and in New York, and that governments sincerely commit themselves to rethinking their development and other priorities on the ground.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
And do you think that and of course the UPR, what you mentioned, there can be some criticism, but do you think with what we discussed today, there is hope for convergence and for complementarity and for...
Well, yes, at the level of Geneva and New York, I think it's very positive that all this is happening, and there is scope for convergence, and it has actually forced different parts of the UN system to become more effective, more efficient. They become more visible, special procedures and treaty bodies. But the concern remains that we can become very efficient at the global level, but unless we're able to tackle the enormous obstacles on the ground, all of that just remains rhetoric. And as the ambassador, the president of the council was saying, there's a comfort zone that governments and others get and capsule into, and what we need to do is to get them to break out of that.
Make them uncomfortable.
Yeah, make them uncomfortable and ask difficult questions. That's right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Good afternoon, my name is Katerina Rose from the ICC of NHRIs, the Geneva representative. And I've been asked to respond to a question in relation to the role of national human rights institutions in the second cycle of the UPR. I guess that the key question that everyone is asking is who will be assessing the level of implementation and the status of implementation for the second cycle of the UPR. And the idea would be that national human rights institutions, because of their independence and because of the authoritative information that they can provide and their monitoring roles under the Paris Principles, they could have a very clear and very important role in assessing the implementation of UPR recommendations by a state. Based on their work domestically as strong, independent domestic actors, they could provide information to the second cycle of the UPR and assess the level of implementation. This is why the ICC, in its engagement on the Human Rights Council review process, is asking for a clearer and more visible role for national human rights institutions in the second cycle of the UPR. This would include the opportunity for NHRIs to present their report and their findings at the working group level of the UPR, and also to have an enhanced participation role and rights at the plenary level, but also to be able to have the NHRI's contributions be more visible in the documentation part, meaning that they should have either a separate report or a separate section in the UPR documentation or in the stakeholders report.
Thank you. Thank you.
Explain to us briefly a little more in a minute what's on your agenda and for our viewers. We're going to put it on our website. And what's on the agenda for the review?
Well, of course, we will be reviewing the working functioning of the Council. And as I said, the main aim, the overriding objective, would be to see how the Council can have better impact on the ground, meaning in terms of improving the human rights situation of peoples. So that's the first goal. Second goal is how can we do better in dealing with emergency situation involving human rights violation. You know, we see these kind of situations taking place in many places around the world. For the Human Rights Council to be credible and relevant, we have to be able to address these situations. But of course, I hope that we can address these situations in a constructive way, through constructive dialogue with countries concerned. And here, what is important is that the Council has to develop tools for constructive dialogue engagement with countries concerned to address urgent situation involving human rights violation. And third, I think we have to do better in the way that the Council is running. We have to be focused in our work, we have to maximize our resources. We passed so many resolutions in each session. I think the last session we passed some 30 resolutions. We have to make sure that these resolutions are of consequence. We have to make sure that once we pass them, we will implement and follow up on these resolutions. So basically these are the objectives of the review process. But of course, we're looking at the individual components, mechanism of the Council. The UPR is very important. Many people say that it's the success of the Council in terms of engaging every country which are members of the UN in the review process.
Providing a comfort level, as you mentioned.
Yes, providing a comfort level. We have so many recommendations coming out. Some of them may be difficult to implement because some of them may lack clarity. We have to make sure that recommendations we make are focused and are implementable. And also some of them may involve building up capacities of countries concerned. So for this review process, we have to think of how we can do better in the UPR process in terms of the recommendations that we make.
For the second cycle?
Yes, for the second cycle.
Do you think the cycle will take a little pause between the second cycle gets back? Or
well, that is being discussed. There are merits to having a pause. Of course, I understand the concern of pause, we may lose momentum, but the second cycle is an important cycle because, as I said, it's about implementation. Countries will have to be better prepared. So there are merits to both viewpoints, and we're discussing that in the process of the review of the Council.
Thank you so much, Mr. Invest.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.